It's very different to buying a property. When you're buying a company, you are standing in the person that owns that company or the people that own that company. You're buying the shares, you become that company. So you're stepping into their shoes. Everything that company has ever done becomes your problem.
Is it typical that a portfolio purchase of 10, 12, 15 houses that individually that you will get a discount? Is that the standard norm?
So from my experience, I would say yes, but not always.
Just explain what vendor finance really means.
So vendor finance just means basically the vendor becomes the bank or an element of the lending.
Is there any tips and tricks that we've not mentioned?
Be really open, know what you're buying, be patient.
Is buying property portfolios the ultimate investment hack?
Building wealth through property isn't about chasing big deals and paydays. It's about owning assets that make money for you consistently. But figuring it all out on your own, that's where most people get stuck. That's why we created this Property Life membership. It's everything we wish we had when we started. Expert guidance, real-world case studies, and a private community of investors actually doing deals, not just talking about them. So you could spend years trying to piece it all together yourself, or you could plug into a system that's already working for our community. Check out our membership page at This Property Life. Everything you need to know is right there. Success is a team sport. Come join in.
Is buying property portfolios the ultimate investment hack? In today's market, where individual property deals can be time-consuming and costly, are property portfolio purchases the answer? Joining me today is Angie Nicholls, a highly experienced property investor with years of experience in the industry, a director at KPA Property. Angie has a real passion for acquiring property portfolios, enabling her to accelerate growth and maximise returns. And in this episode, Angie's going to share her top tips and tricks for successful property portfolio purchases, including how to identify lucrative deals, navigate complex negotiations, and what to do with a portfolio post-purchase. So whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, I'm sure Angie's insights will provide valuable guidance on leveraging portfolio purchases to build wealth in the property market. Welcome, Angie. It's so good to have you here.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, property portfolio purchases, the triple P, which has almost caught me out already, and I've only been going a minute. Before we jump in, let's tackle one of the biggest hurdles for property investors, finding the best buy-to-let locations for top returns. Over the years, we've helped countless individuals pinpoint the most profitable locations and maximise their rental income. To make it easier for you, we've put together a free guide to buy-to-let hotspots for 2025, designed specifically for you to understand the market, stay ahead of the trends, and it even includes a list of our top 10 locations in the UK. Get it now for free by clicking the link in the description below and start building your property portfolio today.
Yeah, absolutely. The jigsaw puzzle, as I like to call them, they're all just so different, Sarah. That's what I love about them. You know, they're as individual as a fingerprint. You know, you've got different vendors with different reasons that they want to sell, often with inside a company wrapper. So different things have been happening in that company. So it's kind of understanding their motivations to sell, looking at what you're buying. A wise person once said to me, look at it as, what are you buying? And I know that might sound really simplistic, but it's like, you know, are you buying BMV? Are you buying untapped GDV? Are you buying yield? Are you buying ROI? Are you buying all of those things? So it's like, what are you buying? What does the deal represent to you? And the solution of it can be really fascinating. So yeah, I really like it.
No size fits all in this part of property, is there? Everything is completely unique. Obviously, there's education that you get from each deal that you've done that you can bring to the next one. But I mean, how did you even get started in this?
So we got started, it's kind of a natural progression, really. So when we first started, I've been buying property since 2002. I bought my first buy-to-let in 2002. Ultimately, I'm a business person. So I'm part of the KPA group, which has been around since 1948. And we used to buy property as an asset class when times were good. So we turned our attention to property in 2016, and we started to buy HMOs. So my oldest son joined the business and he's a maths grad. So he loves the numbers. So I'm very lucky working alongside a maths grad. And he'd stayed in some pretty dodgy HMOs in Bristol and we knew we could add value. So we originally started, with HMOs and like a lot of people, it was a case of what do? We do HMOs, you kind of hone your craft. And then we joined the PIP community. And I know you're familiar with the partners in property community. And it was just an absolute eye opener. People were doing different things. And it really was a case of understanding the importance of surrounding yourself with experience and exceptionality, really. These kind of humble people, you kind of rock up and say, oh, so what are you doing? And they would tell you and you think, oh my goodness, crazy. So it was ideas and speaking to people and sort of realizing the potential of doing things, not actually having a single model, but actually looking at the deal as a deal and does it stack? And we took, for exactly the reasons you mentioned, we turned our attention to portfolio purchases, and it means that you can accelerate quickly. If you understand business, as we were very lucky to, you're not scared by the risk of buying someone's business, and you're often buying several properties all in one go because you're buying someone's property portfolio.
And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that those properties are all going to be in the same place, does it?
Absolutely. The most recent portfolio that we completed on at the beginning of April, all over the country. So 17 properties, some are flats, some are houses, a couple of HMOs, and we've got, Weston, Bath, Bristol, Bolton, all over the shop, really. So yeah, you're right, different locations.
But let's take it back to the beginning of this. So we know that from a time perspective and a cost perspective, there's some good savings to be made from doing one transaction rather than, say, 17 transactions. And that's an obvious thing. But how do you find those deals in the first place? Are they listed on Rightmove? Is there a special little website that we don't know about?
That's a really great question. So they come from everywhere. So they will come from our network. And again, it reinforces the importance of surrounding yourself with, some really great people. They'll come from sources, they'll come from agents, they'll come from brokers, they'll come from vendors themselves who have heard about what we do and who are looking to sell and just want to have a conversation. They come from people who you've transacted with before. They come from word of mouth. I really wish there was a little website that wouldn't that be great? But really, they just come from everywhere. And it again reinforces the importance of telling everybody about what you do. And then it kind of, opens the door really to have more deals. But yeah, pretty much everywhere.
What's the first step when a portfolio comes across your desk? You may have all the information on it in terms of the addresses and whether they're tenanted or vacant, the rental figures. You might have that, you might not. And obviously you're going to gather that throughout your process. But I mean, how do you start to analyze that deal?
So I like to look at, again, what am I buying? What am I buying and what value can I add? And sometimes that's quite obvious because you'll look at it and the BMV is a really lovely chunky BMV. Sometimes you'll look at it and it's looking beyond the purchase price. So what value can I add? But the first step is always a conversation. That will depend on where it's come from. So if it's come from an agent, I always like to talk to the vendor. So I'll always say to the agent, I'd really like to talk to your client. Obviously, their motivations are they want you to ensure that they're not going to be cut out of the deal. So it's like, I'd love to talk to your client alongside you. Does that work for you? So you'll often find that the first few conversations will be with the agent as well. And often, once they've realized that's not what you're about, that's not how you do business, they're quite happy for you to have access to their client. It's also really useful to be able to talk to the client's accountant because obviously often there'll be tax implications and, other things will be involved for their client. So really kind of, is there a culture fit? Are you on the same page? What is it they're after? How can you provide a solution? And that conversation. And that's often the bit, Sarah, that people just do too quickly, I find. They just want to rush to the deal, the numbers, etc. But it's very much a relationship build. These things can take a long time to transact. The average time scale for transacting we found is about kind of 6 to 7 months. So you're looking at being involved with this person for a long time. You're looking at trying to find a solution that's going to not just work for you, but is ultimately really going to work for them. So you need to have that conversation. So I'd say that's the first thing. What does it mean to me? Is it something I'm interested in? Is it something where I can add value? And let's have a conversation with the vendor and his representatives, his or her representatives.
And during that sort of 6 to 7 month process, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be like, okay, so those 17 houses that you've just bought, did you go and visit every single one of them?
We did in the early days. And it's really funny because we used to in the early days, and I used to really frown upon people who didn't. I used to think, how could you buy something you haven't seen? And I have to be honest and say that we don't always now.
Okay.
Somebody else will visit that for us, or maybe, we'll have a viewer. And again, it's all part of the kind of risk analysis, isn't it? So, if you're buying at quite a low BMV, then there's quite a lot of things that you can put right, or quite a lot of things that, you would accept. But often we don't go and see them. But yes, we very much used to in the early days.
I think that's probably the case even if you're not doing portfolio purchases. For the first few that I brought, I was always going around to see them, and then sometimes I'd even send Rick just to double check myself. But then you start to trust other people because you've briefed them the way that they need to be briefed, and you will let go of some of that control as your experience grows as well. So I get that. So that's good to know that we don't have to dart around the country. From Scotland to Cornwall, looking at different properties within one purchase. But what are you've mentioned BMV a few times. So for anyone that doesn't know what that means, it's below market value. It's an acronym for that. Is it typical that a portfolio purchase of 10, 12, 15 houses, that individually those houses could be worth X? Is it always typical that when you buy as a group, as a collective, that you will get a discount? Is that the standard norm?
So from my experience, I would say yes, but not always. So we have had situations where there has been the discount. And obviously for some obvious reasons, that's lovely. And also because the vendor wants to transact as quickly as possible. And because they're a business person and, a property investor themselves, they will completely understand your motivations and will be really open for that conversation. But sometimes not. And sometimes there are other elements in the deal, like, for instance, maybe some vendor finance or something that's been happening within that property business that, that you can put right, or, whether it needs asset management or it's under let, or, you can add that value. It doesn't always need to be.
Yeah. And is there a typical percentage that people say? I've seen it bandied about a few of those Facebook groups that, oh, well, if you want a property portfolio, do you want to sell in your portfolio, expect X% off of it. And have you found that there is a bit of a commonality?
So we've seen 70% in the pound. We've seen 80%. What we like to look at, obviously it's lovely to get all your money out. And we have had a couple where we've refinanced and had all our money out, and that's always lovely.
Nice.
But, we like to look at, an ROCE of perhaps 20%. We like to have our money out, our cash out within 5 years. By no means is it, like you see on Facebook where it's, really quick money, fast money. It's not like that at all. As I know, as an investor yourself, Sarah, that, it's slow burn, it's steady. But we obviously have some kind of, metrics that we do like to see. So cash out within 5 years, we're happy. Is there something where we can value add? Then we're really happy. ROC of 20%. But, if it's going to be infinite and we can get our money out, then that's even better.
And the process, is pretty much the same as obviously if you're buying a property in terms of the legal searches and all of that sort of stuff. But there is some added things that go in. And I guess that's around how you structure the deal. So whether you're buying a company, for example, is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So most times I will buy the company, and that brings with it what I like to call the layers. So it brings the layers of legal representation, it brings the layers of lending. Often, again, depending on the deal that you've struck, often it means that you are paying for the vendor's perhaps legal representation, if that's something that you've agreed. And it's not unusual to see maybe 6 or 7 solicitors in the mix. And, it's in your best interest to conveyance, because you want this done as quickly as possible and you want this deal to go through. So, if you've had valuations done on multiple properties, you've already spent money. So you need this to go through. So it means that you've got your foot up the backside of maybe 7 different solicitors. You're trying to get them all to talk together if you possibly can. And as you know, that's often not easy. So you'll have a property solicitor, a commercial solicitor, lending solicitor. Sometimes if there's something that you found in the title that has got missed, you might have a vendor's solicitor. So it kind of adds layers of complexity to it.
And I think I'm right in saying that when you buy a limited company, you're buying far more than just the assets in that company. Any liabilities that are current or even not yet happened but are about to bite you on the bum, they become yours as well, don't they?
100%, absolutely bang on. So when you're buying the company, you are standing in the person that owns that company, or the people that own that company. You're buying the shares, you become that company. So you're stepping into their shoes. So everything that company has ever done becomes your problem. So in that respect, it's very different to just buying a property. So to be kind of cognizant of that, to have working understanding of how a business works, to be able to to look at a balance sheet, to understand what's happened within that business wrapper is really important.
Yeah. So and people could come back within a 7-year period and suddenly say, right, this company owes me money, and suddenly that's your problem, not the old director's problem.
Absolutely. So the due diligence is far greater, and your accountant and the vendor's accountant need to be involved. You need to be able to look at that yourself and understand what's been happening. I mean, warranties obviously are great, but warranties are going to be limited because, you don't have any idea of what's been going on inside the company. I would say legal representation is key. And this is not your, how cheaply can I get this for? Our most recent purchase, just the lenders, solicitors' fees were £18,000, just the lenders. So, I mean, you're not looking at bargain basement here for kind of solicitors' fees. It's somebody you trust, somebody you've used before, somebody who will go that extra mile for you, because you could be looking at, an unusual share purchase agreement. There could be a lot of back and forth. It's a very different ball game to just buying a property.
And so we've sourced a deal. We've had either ourselves or other people go and look at it. The due diligence is happening in the background in terms of that limited company and the directors. What other things are you aware of at this stage that you need to be doing? I mean, in terms of the creativity of some of the deals that you've done, a straight BMV discount is one thing, but what other exciting creative things have you experienced or heard of?
Can be as creative as you want it to be, really. So it literally is a case of sitting down with the vendor and saying, other than selling, what are your motivations? So we did a deal a few years back where you had 3 separate parties who owned a multi-unit freehold block with inside a company, and they all wanted to sell. So one wanted to sell because they were just too busy. One wanted to sell, because they'd self-managed. One wanted to sell because they were getting older and COVID had made them realise that, they wanted to live their life to the full. They didn't want to be tied. They wanted to realise their asset. Another one just wanted to, was younger and just wanted to be able to buy a holiday home and spend money and time with their family. So it's kind of understanding their motivations. But their concerns were the fact that along with this property also came a separate unit that was absolutely ripe for development. And they'd always wanted to develop it and never had, and couldn't quite work out how. So to them, they wanted not just to sell, but they wanted a share in that. So, we were looking at a runoff situation. They had other purchasers approached them and couldn't quite make it work because they'd had some pretty hefty ERCs in the mix. And we looked at that and we said, well, actually, your lender is Lloyd's. So we look at that and think, great, because it's a really, kind of like mature bank which understands this kind of thing. It will have a business manager that you can have a conversation with. And actually, if we can jump in and just try to step into that for you, then we can take that issue away for you as well. And, we understand that you've always wanted to do this development of this separate unit on site. Great, we'll apply for planning. And if we do, then you can have a share of that. So it's like, what does this property mean to you beyond, the financial rewards and, monetizing? Or it might be a case of somebody just wants to get rid of the burden. They've had enough. Another portfolio that we purchased said had enforcement notices and they were just absolutely had enough. But they were also looking for an investment vehicle for the money once they'd sold. It was like, great, this portfolio. You spent your life building it. Let us be that kind of investment vehicle for you. So it's when you have those conversations where you really get to understand them and you're kind of, yes, you're there because of the deal, but you're also talking to them as individuals and people and understanding their motivations. It can then open a whole load of other things and you get to write that, between the two of you. You get to say, okay, let's do it this way. And you get to decide. Sometimes you might have no idea. You go, this is really interesting and you want to sell and I want to buy it and I know I can add value, but I'm really not sure how we can put this one together. And you might have to sleep on it for a few days and then come back to the table and say, hang on a minute, I've had this idea. How are you feeling about this? And it's that lovely jigsaw puzzle kind of solution provide.
And, when you're purchasing these portfolios, you've mentioned lenders, solicitors. So are you always buying with mortgages in place?
So mostly. So one that we bought last year, the vendor was the bank. So it was vendor finance. And it was great because that was, during a time when, the rates were, we've had some issues, haven't we, recently with rates and what have you, and it kind of unlocked the deal. He wanted it to be done by a certain period of time because tax was changing and kind of capital gains thresholds, etc., were changing for him. So it had to be quick. And we'd intended to kind of title split on the way in and provide that as a value, but we just didn't have the time. And he said, look, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this cash. I know the portfolio really well. And we said, well, are you happy for vendor finance? And it kind of unlocked the value for us. So it kind of really, really depends. It really is like a fingerprint. They are all so different, which is what I love about them.
And of course, vendor finance is something that is often bandied around and spoken about. I personally believe not a lot of people have actually done it. So just explain for those who aren't aware what vendor finance really means.
So vendor finance just means basically the vendor becomes the bank or an element of the lending. So you'd look at it in the usual way. You would say, okay, what security can I give the vendor for the cash that he's leaving in? So, often if there's a first charge, and they can't have a first charge, but if there isn't, then they certainly can. Or do they want to retain shares in the business? Or did you have something else that was unencumbered? It's looking at security for them. Often for them, they are going to be putting it in a bank or what have you with, a small amount of interest going on there. So you can say to them, well, look, this is what I would look to pay on the high street, and it can be very much a win-win for both sides on that respect. But, what vendor finance can work really, really well, can be really powerful.
So a portfolio is being sold for £1 million for the sake of easy numbers. And obviously that vendor will get the £1 million minus certain transactional costs. And ordinarily in a purchase, a mortgage provider would give you 70% of that million. You'd put in the 30%. But in this case, the LTV could be different. But essentially on the point of the solicitors ringing each other and physically saying the words, we have completed, and putting the phone down, at that point, the money does a double bounce. So it's sort of like it goes to the vendor and it goes straight back again in terms of they are now your kind of mortgage company.
Exactly. And, it obviously needs to work really well for both sides. But, that's one of the first questions that we will ask, because if it's not in this deal, then we're always doing deals. So we look to do 2 portfolio purchases a year if we can manage. So if it's not going to be in this one, then, it could be in the next one. And you've spent a long time getting to know them. So by the time you get to that question, they often feel very comfortable talking to you about figures.
Yeah. And I guess in that sort of situation, if you'd have looked at the portfolio and sort of thought, right, actually, we can add a lot of value here by either developing or changing the tenant type and the end use, or whatever it could be, at the end of whatever period you've agreed with that vendor, whether it's, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it could be, at that point, you've then got an increased asset base, and then you would go to traditional finance and switch them out. Vendor goes off, travels the world, enjoying the fruits of their labour.
Absolutely. Or vendor will say, "Are we up for the next one?" So,
Ideas, though. That's the dream.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So I think everyone can probably start to see why Angie really loves this, because it's like a blank sheet of paper at the beginning, and you're coming up with a win-win for everybody involved, and it can be different each time, which is kind of exciting and interesting, isn't it?
So I love it from the people aspect, because again, as exactly as you said, if it's not a win-win, I'm not interested. So, to then see the kind of the eyes light up and think, actually, we could do this. Or, someone that says to you, I really wanted to do this with the property. I'm really sad that I've got to sell now. And you can say, well, actually, I'm going to. Would you like to be part of that? We had a portfolio purchase a couple of years back that we were talking to a couple who owned lots of property in Bristol. And, we were really excited about the chap being involved in our business. And, the portfolio had a lot of land, and you could tell that he was really, really excited about developing the land and that it was holding him back from the sale. It's like, well, why don't you come on board? We'd love that. And look how much experience you've got, and let's work together. So, sometimes it can be so much bigger than you'd ever imagined.
Yeah, I guess so. And obviously in that sort of situation, you've got to do a whole new set of due diligence on the joint venture aspect of it, and whose roles and responsibilities are this, and what happens in, case of this A, B, and C. But once that's bedded down, as you say, that can be a real huge bonus for everybody, and everyone comes away with a good feeling.
Yeah. And what a fantastic opportunity that is for us as a business to be able to work with somebody who's got far more experience than we have, and to learn, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? As you said at the outset, Sarah, and you were absolutely bang on. You learn from each deal. And I think that's really exciting. And you learn and you pass it on and you listen and you grow. And I just think that's absolutely wonderful. And that's what I love about it. Ben, who's involved in the business, who's our eldest son, he's a maths grad and he loves the figures. He loves to look at a set of figures and say, well, hang on a minute, we could do this. And how about that? And kind of stacking. Me, I love that whole possibility of making something more, providing more, and of learning and growing all the time. That's why I love it.
And there's probably going to be a lot of people out there thinking, well, that's fine. You get this property portfolio and it looks like this. But in the middle of it, there's this, crack den in outer horribleness. And like, what if I was buying a dog? So, you're not going to get 100% of those properties as your grade A listed, like investment classes. There's going to be a few little rough things within your purchase. So what happens then on day one of completion? They're all yours. Where do you go next?
I really try to steer away from that location, that utter horribleness. I don't like that. That's definitely north of the border for me. Yeah, day one, it's down to you. Absolutely. And what do? You put it right. So where I guess I'm quite fortunate is that I own a letting agency. So, we often are in a situation where something, we'll get a key undertaking, in we'll go, something will be ready to go before completion, and it will be tenant ready to go in, before completion. So that's great. Also, as part of our network, I know lots of different people in lots of different parts of the country. And again, it gets back to that whole, your network of exceptional people who, you bounce ideas off and kind of, loosely do business with. So, I'll know builders, et cetera, but you're quite right. That's your problem from day one. So if there is a cracked den, utter horribleness, in will be going. And, I would have spoken to people about, the eviction process. We'd have done that long before completion, and we'll have a plan for that.
If you do find that you've got a portfolio, something in the portfolio that you didn't really want in there, so you're going to sell it off once it's completed. Is there opportunities to sell it off pre the completion?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this most recent, anything is possible. Absolutely. So in this most recent purchase, there were 19 properties in the portfolio. The vendor wanted to keep 2 of them as deposits for her children. So it's like, right, okay, that one comes out. They can come out of the wrapper. We're looking at asset managing for this one, so we're not going to keep them all. We'll flip some of them on. We've got different agents because some of them are in different parts of the country. Some of them are coming to our agency. So the ones in Bristol and Bath and Western we'll be managing ourselves. So it literally is very much a mixed bag. But yeah, anything can happen, and anything is, it's writing the rules with the vendor.
Yeah. And you just have a conversation with your lender as to, look, we've got 18 properties, but 3 of them we're not wanting that. So we're going to be selling them. And as long as, I guess, you're being very transparent at the beginning as to what you want to happen, they work with you.
100%. Yeah. You have to stand side by side with the lender and say, this is the plan. So it's like every purchase has its own business plan. So this is the plan. This is what we're buying. This is what we'll be doing with it. These are the figures. How are we feeling about that? So yeah, absolutely. You have to be side by side with your lender and side by side with your legal representation. And they need to know exactly what your motives are and exactly what your intentions are once you bought.
I'm guessing, just from a complexity perspective, that you use one lender for the portfolio purchase, or do you use a couple?
So we have a couple. So we'd have one solicitor for the commercial side for the portfolio purchase, one solicitor for the conveyancing, so the properties within inside the business, and often there'll be solicitors for the lenders as well. So that in itself is
herding cats.
Herding cats, absolutely. Or was it stapling jelly to the wall?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Whilst cats are running around your knees. Yeah,
absolutely.
So if we're talking about buying 17 houses, regardless of where they are, and I know obviously that you're Bristol based and probably have a bit of a radius around Bristol, which is a high value area, even if you're doing it up in a lower value area, we're talking about a lot of money, aren't we, to go out and buy 10 houses, 15 houses or 20 houses in one go, even with a 70% lending available, from a mortgage company. So this isn't for your new to property unless they've got a big capital pot. Would that be fair?
Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted. It doesn't mean to say it can't be done. I would just go into it eyes wide open. I would be asking questions of people that have done it before. And, often, as you quite rightly said, there are often some great discounts to be had, because somebody selling that size of portfolio, it's going to take them a long time to take them out of the business wrapper and sell them individually. We know that 1 in 3 sales falls through. So you're kind of looking at that times 17 times. So you can understand what their motivations are. But, often you can go in on a bridge. And if you're buying BMV, you can do some, great things with lending. And then also, when you look at the value you've added, you can also do some great things with refinancing. So, but yeah, it definitely adds several layers of complexity. You're right.
And would you recommend for people to cut their teeth on, a certain amount of property transactions or, a certain amount of time in the industry before they start to explore this as a strategy?
That is such an interesting question. Both are. I think if you could drill into somebody who had done it before, So again, I know I keep saying this, I sound like a broken record, but here your network is your net worth. So if you've got somebody who has done this before, or, that definitely minimizes risk. But for us, it definitely worked that, we'd bought property before, we bought single properties before, we understood the process, we understood the conveyancing, we understood the adding value before we moved on to that. But I think, if you can kind of access somebody who's done it before, then, I guess both is right, really.
Yeah. So we've covered kind of like how you can find them, and it is a very broad funnel of different places. But the ultimate lesson on that was tell people what you do and go and talk to people. And we've spoken about the sort of time that it takes to conveyance, all the different people that you've got to get involved and project manage, and the due diligence aspects of buying companies and potentially, going into joint ventures with them. We've covered exciting stuff like vendor finance and, the creativity around the deal structuring. Is there any sort of tips and tricks that or things to be aware of that we've not mentioned that you think actually this is really important?
Be really open. So have a really, really open mind. Start with the solution in mind. So for the vendor, know what you're buying. That definitely know, and I don't mean in terms of the actual property itself, but what is it you're buying in terms of what can you do with it? Why you? Where can you add value? I'd say where there's a will, there's a way. So, if you've got a vendor and a purchaser and maybe an accountant and some agents sitting together saying, wouldn't this be a great deal to do? And both of them are really motivated and invested to transact, then there will be a way. I would say ask questions, put yourself in rooms or places where, least, where people in that room who know so much more than you do. And there's so much value in that. The conversations are different, lots and lots of value in that. Be patient. So these things can often take a long time to transact. As I say, an average is 7 months, but it can be a lot more than that. And if you can't initially find a solution, keep plugging away. Because there are so many different things within the whole realm of, being involved in a business, or, perhaps you and the vendor for a short period of time being involved side by side in a business, or, having a runoff on something else that you're going to do, or where you're going to add value. There's an absolute myriad of things that could be done. So be patient if you don't see the solution first.
Fantastic. And obviously we've already covered some of the benefits that there are in terms of accelerated growth, even with a very long conveyance in time and due diligence time. There's the accelerated growth, there's the creativity around the deal structuring, and then there's little things, isn't there? So if you're buying a limited company, there's a stamp duty saving, I believe. So it's 5%. Is it 5%?
Absolutely. So when you're buying the shares, absolutely. Sometimes though, because of the layers of, legal representation, I'm going to say you have to look at that because it's a great headline phrase, isn't it? So you need to look at that and put it into context, definitely. But yeah, absolutely. There was some great kind of, tax reasons and what have you for buying in a company.
Yeah. But as you say, some of those additional costs can kind of almost outweigh the stamp. So you've got to really look at every single cost that you are going to have in your transaction and make sure your numbers are based on all of it.
100%. The frictionals are definitely more, and you'd need to kind of expect that at the outset.
I think that is the case in all of property at the moment, where the transactional costs of doing business are so high. I mean, it can kill some deals.
Yeah, absolutely. And things that you don't expect. So we also like to buy individual properties. And what we tend to do kind of as a model is we look to do a couple of portfolio purchases a year. And then in the middle, we'll do kind of a little bit more bread and butter stuff. And we bought something at auction the other day. And when you look at the fees, you just look at that and think, I mean, it was a great deal. The agency, we were able to sort of do it really speedily and had a tenant lined up, etc. But I looked at that and just thought, my goodness, by the time you're paying the auction fees and all the rest of it, exactly what you were saying, the frictionals these days, it's really costly.
Yeah. I guess anyone listening to myself talk to Angie at the moment would probably kind of go, Oh my God, Angie, you're so busy. You're doing so much, but obviously you're a family business. There's more than just you, and you mentioned your son Ben, but you do have a good team, and that's one of your passions as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have businesses outside of the property sphere, which my husband is very heavily involved in. And and most of that really is kind of like, marketing, and they do some really interesting stuff. So I often find myself sticking my snout in the marketing trough because there's some of the stuff they're doing is just
Genius.
awesome.
Yeah.
My eldest son and I front up the property side. So we have, a multi-branch agency. So we cover Bristol, Western and Bridgewater. So we've got a team there. And the property side, it's kind of acquisitions agency. And also I'm a director and shareholder of Partners in Property, the property networking community. So yeah, lots going on. But I have to say, and I'm not even going to apologise for this, I have the best team in the world. So I really couldn't do what I do without them. They are absolutely fantastic.
And when I'm doing a podcast on am I addicted to property and work, I think I might have to come call you.
It's what makes the world go round, isn't it?
Well, it is. And talking to you today, the passion that you've got for it is obvious. So, that whole saying that if you love what you do, it's not work. It still is. And there's still commitments that we have to put in. But, you can tell that you love it.
I really do love it. I consider myself so lucky. I wake up most mornings with an attitude of gratitude. How lucky am I? It's a family business. I get to work with the people I love most in the world. I have the best team. And I think the day that it isn't exciting and doesn't feel like a passion for me is the day to put my feet up. But from where I'm sitting, that's not anytime soon.
Fantastic. Angie, how can people get hold of you?
So we've got a website, kpa.co.uk. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, the usual places really.
Perfect. So if you want to connect with Angie, just look up Angie Nicholls on LinkedIn, wherever it may be. The usual suspects are there. So please do connect. And we really hope that you have enjoyed finding out all about portfolio purchases. And if it tickles your boat, then I always like to mix up sayings. That's one of my things, just another one of mine. So yeah, if you fancy finding out more, do get in touch. Many thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed our chat. Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem.